This video will describe a minor modification that you can make to the aggregate planning model if you're trying to use the solver with a Mac computer. For this problem, there were three constraints, and what we're going to do to adapt this to the Mac solver is make sure that all of the constraints simply have a number on the right-hand side. So the first constraint in the model that's described originally is that the units available to meet demand are greater than the demand. In terms of this constraint, it's exactly the same constraint as saying that the ending inventory is greater than or equal to 0. Both of those constraints would be equal. So we're just going to enter a line at the bottom of the sheet for ending inventory and reference the ending inventory for month 1, and then copy this over to the other months. And ultimately, we're going to make all of these ending inventories equal to 0. The next constraint in the original model is that the overtime hours used are less than or equal to the maximum overtime hours. In this case, what you see in the decision variables or changing cells right now is simply starting values, not the values after running solver. To modify this constraint, we're going to have a line called excess overtime hours, and that will just be the maximum overtime hours minus the overtime hours used. So in other words, the excess overtime hours that could be assigned based on their workforce but that are not assigned. And we'll make those cells with a constraint greater than or equal to 0. The last constraint in this model is that the production capacity is greater than or equal to the units produced. To modify this constraint, we're going to have a line where the excess capacity is equal to the production capacity minus the units produced. Clearly, the negative number won't be a valid value for this once we run solver and assign the best values for the decision variables. So the first extra row just references the ending inventory. The second is the maximum overtime hours, line 20, minus the overtime hours assigned. You can see that here. And the third is the excess capacity, production capacity minus units produced. And all of these values, one value for each month, are all greater than or equal to 0. This set of constraints will be equivalent to the original set of constraints. And hopefully the solver in the Mac, because we'll type in the 0 when we go to the solver window, will be able to process these constraints. So we need to open solver. The objective in this problem is the total cost that we minimize. The changing cells are in the ranges that are highlighted in yellow. So I'll highlight the first range. We can either type a comma or hold down Control, and the Control key seems to work better in the Mac version. So I'm going to hold down Control and then highlight the overtime hours, and then keep Control down and highlight the third range, which is units produced. Now we need to add the constraints. And the nice thing about having them formatted this way is that what we can do is simply highlight all 12 of these cells, the 3 rows we added for the 4 months, and then make those greater than or equal to, and I'm going to simply type in 0 and see if that's the Mac solver will process that. So there is the result. Clicking Solve. This is the same optimal solution that the other model gave. So incidentally, you can use this also if you're just using the Windows solver as well, but if all you have access to is a Mac solver, this would be a way that you can probably the best way to go ahead and solve this and the model for the next assignment.